if you're just starting out in business, there is nothing more valuable, especially in today's market, than to be able to grow your network and to be able to find the right people in your network. And so I think the best piece of advice I really have for you is whichever, direction you want to be able to go into, whichever niche you want to be able to go into, study that niche. But give yourself like a deadline, like give yourself like maybe a couple weeks, a month max, to really like get your knowledge up to par where you understand the language, could kind of hold your own in a conversation. The reason I say a deadline is because you want to get your knowledge up, but you also want to be able to take action.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that has built several startups and small businesses to 7- and 8-figure companies, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great guest on the episode, Jay Wong. And Jay started out, graduated in about 2010, and was a partner in a startup imploded, and so had to figure out what he went from there. Had a mentor referred him over to strategic coaching, did that for a bit of time, and then decided, hey, strategic coaching is not where I want to be in the next 5 or 10 years, and then started his journey on doing podcasting and production and otherwise offering that as services, and he'll expand a bit more about that as he goes through his journey. But with that, and as much of an intro as that is, welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Yeah, super excited to be here with you, and just excited to dive in and even have you share about that journey. It's like walking down memory lane a little bit.
Hey, it's always fun to take that stroll, all right? So
yeah.
With that, I kind of stole a bit of your thunder, but maybe jumping back, kind of take us back to graduate school and graduating, and where your journey started from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think even when we were doing some of the off-record, pre-interview stuff, I was mentioning, I don't get a chance, sometimes when, we're talking about marketing and how to get greater leads and how to get greater ROI, it kind of gets super, into the weeds and sometimes it gets super nerdy really quick, right? And it actually got me thinking that, is that where the beginning of my journey began, right? And actually it reminded me that, through a whole series of events, I ended up, becoming this graduation speaker for my, I went to, even though I'm from Canada, I actually did high school in the US, so in Maryland. And, graduating high school in the US, I don't know how it is in Canada, but it's like a very big deal. Right. And I'm sure you could attest to that. But I ended up being the speaker at graduation in front of, I think it was like 4,000 something people, because we were in Maryland. It was at Constitutional Hall. And I just remember, and the reason I'm sharing this is because one, I wasn't this like straight A valedictorian, like that was really not who I was. And the way that I got that speech was really through this kind of open competition, open contest. But even back then, 17 years old, it reminded me that that was really the beginning of it, because I remember that was one of the first things I did. Like maybe it was that talk, maybe it was the energy in the room. I don't know what it was, but it was one of the first things I did that I thought to myself, you know what, I have maybe the potential, and maybe this could be something that I want to continue to do for the rest of my life. And maybe it's about sharing positive messages. Maybe it's some form of communication. I'm not quite sure what that is yet. Maybe it was just a high of the moment, right? I don't know, but it was so great, Devin, that really began this entire journey of just saying, hey, you know what? How do I do more of those things that I'm really great at? How do I access unique ability, or how do I get lost in that one or two things that I can be amazing at? And that's what's always driven me to do all things, ever since that point.
So you did that and graduated high school, gave a great speech, set you up on your course to where you're at now. You went off to school, and I think you did. You went to school, and I can't remember, where did you say you went to school again?
Yeah, so I moved back to Canada, went to business school out there, University of Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada. Fun fact for everybody.
All right. And so you went to school, graduated, and then if I remember right when we talked before, you went and worked for a startup and that it
Yeah.
imploded. But talk a little bit about going to working for a startup out of school and how that went for you.
Yeah. So, it's, I think at that time, this was like 2010, 2011, Shopify had just started, was like becoming this like thing. It wasn't what Shopify is now today, but Shopify started, I'm pretty sure, in Ottawa. And so there was this, energy buzzing around of people saying, hey, we want to, go into startups and be able to do all these different things. And I was working at a internet marketing company at the time. I didn't think back and look back at that, and didn't think about internet marketing in the same ways, but really they were like an online directory, right? They were across Canada and they would sell listings, right? If you're a small business, if you're an IP lawyer or yoga studio or what, whether you're an event for the city, you would essentially want to list your events or list your business on, said directory. And, essentially I hit it off with one of the partners there. We went off and we created essentially a different variation of that directory. We had, a lot of, businesses that, bought in. We had sold a lot of early contracts. So like the momentum was there, right? And we were, just obviously just thrilled. I was like 20 years old, 21. I was thinking, Devin, that, this was going to be it, right? We're going to make it big, and it's kind of like that little meme. Exactly, right? And it's like, look at everybody that's striving to get these 30, 40, 50K, starting salaries, right? And here we are, making the push, putting in, right, 12, 14, sometimes more hours a day. But, you want to make it happen, right? And it's the dream. And so when things started kind of break, because, it's great to have great momentum, great to have funding, great to have sales, right? But, it's a completely different thing to be able to say, hey, we not just had a great quarter or a great few months, but we have to actually build a company. We have to actually build a team. We have to actually be able to deliver on some of these things before we run out of capital, right? And, just learning some of those lessons along the way, it reminded me that, hey, I want to be able to do my own thing, or I want to be able to, have a business where we care about, the end customers and who we make a difference for. But maybe this is probably not going to be the vehicle, because it just required, so much more investment from a time perspective. My partner, he was, essentially having, entering a new phase in life, right? He was about to have kids, and it was going to be his first kid. So like, it just didn't really make sense for us to really continue down that path. But a lot of hard lessons learned, just being able to go through that. One of which is to maybe not spend all of your student loans and all the money into a potential startup. Maybe just keep some of it, but nonetheless, a lot of hard lessons through that experience.
So no, and first of all, yes, I don't know that, I don't even know that you always spend any student loans into it, but certainly not all of it. But you did that. And so you said, okay, first of all, start out, hey, this is my dream. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. And, the thing that every entrepreneur thinks is, hey, this is going to be the next, $1 billion idea or $1 billion idea, whatever. And sometimes it works out. A lot of times it doesn't. So it was a lesson to learn. But so that kind of, whether you say it imploded or, kind of, it didn't make sense to continue on, people are going their different ways and any and all the above. So how did you kind of pick up the pieces or decide what you wanted to do next from there?
One of the things, and even in having this conversation, right, a couple things come to mind. One is that you learn so much from failures that you don't even understand or even can think about it fully unless you have a great chat about, with Devin and he's able to almost reflect back the story to you. Because, the reason I went to business school was because my parents had a failed business. And, they were running a restaurant back in Maryland, and that failed. They had to declare bankruptcy. And that, it was just not a very pleasant experience for them, but also not a very great experience for our family. Right. And we already, didn't have very much growing up. And to be able to kind of see them kind of go through that. Now they've have had successful businesses in the past. So, it's one of the failures along the way. But I remember I thought, you know what, if I go to business school, maybe, right? Maybe, just maybe we can learn about money. We can learn about how to actually run a business, and maybe we can prevent that down the line.
Mm.
Right. And even, coming out of this failed startup, I remember thinking, the one thing that, you know, I think as a young person or anybody starting out, the one thing that is so highly valuable is not just your word, but how you build up relationships around you, right? The network effect that people always talk about. It's why people go to certain schools. It's why people want to go to certain neighborhoods, right? They want to be surrounded with certain types of individuals. And for me, when I was left with nothing or starting out, and it felt like all the offers that all my friends are going after, that whole period, already went and passed, I just went back to, hey, who's in my network, right? That, I could perhaps in the past have added some good value for, right? Maybe I can lean on them, right? And just share with them what's really happening, and because of that, I ended up connecting with an old kind of mentor of mine that, I didn't really connect with for the last 3-4 years up until that time. And it was through conversations with that individual, but he ultimately, he ended up connecting me with somebody at Strategic Coach, which ended up being my next role. And, obviously there were so many, mini conversations along the way, but, just the power of one connection, the power of the right connections, right? Sometimes just make a world of difference.
No, and as an aside, one thing that you kind of brought up, or it came to mind as you were talking, is you mentioned kind of, hey, you can go to MBA school, or I can go to business school. I can get a lot of insight, and so, and I talk I did an MBA school, so I did an engineering degree, a Chinese degree, an MBA, and a law degree. So I ended up getting 4, which my wife always says is 3 too many. But, the interesting thing with any business school or MBA school is it doesn't really prepare you for a startup life. I mean, I always think of it more as it helps you to engage or to be part of a bigger business, right? So it prepares you to be on a marketing team. It prepares you to help a bigger business grow, to see a bigger picture. But I don't remember really any classes that I would look back and say, oh yeah, that helped me prepare for start. Now I've leveraged some of the knowledge, but it wasn't just, oh yeah, I come out of a business school or MBA school and I know how to run a startup and how to be successful. So I think really a lot of it kind of is what you've alluded to. It's that learning on the ground and making the mistakes and also figuring it out. You're going to have to go through that, whether or not you have an MBA or business degree or anything else.
Yeah. Well, there's just nothing better than real life experience. Right. Yeah. And just, even something as fundamental or as basic as some people would say, as like, hey, trust your gut, listen to your gut, right? Listen to your intuition. It's like, well, what does that really mean? And you need many moments of that, of you not listening to your intuition, right? Or you not, following through on something for you to actually see, okay, that's really what that feels like. And that's really what, when people say do those things, that's what they mean.
Yeah. Completely agree. So now you connected up with your mentor, and you did, made that connection, started to do strategic coaching. And then I think you said kind of the next step was you did strategic coaching for a period of time. And as you got into that, you're looking and saying, now, where do I want to be? And then kind of the old cliche question that you always get in the job interview as you're talking to your boss. And I always hated that question. He's like, where do you think you're going to be in the next 5 or 10 years? I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going to be next year, let alone in 5 or 10 years. Or you give the answer, oh, I want to be, a devoted part of the company, when you're really wanting to go do your own thing. Anyway, that's a complete aside. But the next 5 or 10 years, but you did at least look out and say, I don't see this as my long-term, where I want to be, what I want to do. And so as you made that realization, as you're saying, strategic coaching isn't where I want to be long-term in my career, how did you kind of make that next transition?
It's a loaded question, right? Because there's I always think it's never one. It's not like I went in one day and there was this, somebody spilled a coffee on me, and like, I just had a horrific morning, and then there was this one moment in the afternoon I just decided, you know what, this is going to be it. This is going to, forget the old life. Let's enter into the new life. And then the next day, new life begins. Right. And I always think in life, it's always these like series of moments, right? And you starting to notice and ask yourself, you know what, am I going to be happy with this? Is this still bringing me the same level of joy as before? Right. And, one of the things at Strategic Coach, for those that are not familiar with Strategic Coach, they're kind of like a training coaching program for high net worth individuals. We're talking, 7 and 8 figures for sure, but some of them well into the 9 figures, a few billionaires that they've coached. And the whole, the environment around running a company like that, Devin, you can imagine everybody is bought into not just personal development, right? But we're talking, there's language around everybody knows each other's personality types, Kobe indexes, and so part of that is that we share our goals a lot, right? Pretty much every time we come together, hey, what are the great wins that's happening in your life? What are you looking to do in the next 90 days? What are the big, goals? And so when you're around that environment a lot, I realized that I was sharing some of these go out and be able to create a platform, or maybe go out and be able to spread, different messages of positivity and highlight different stories, or write a best-selling novel and, do a speech over here, like all these like big life goals. Right. And I realized that, I was just, the idea of sharing these big goals sometimes was enough to really never do anything about it. Right. It would just create just enough dopamine. Right. I would get just enough validation where I pretty much wouldn't need to do anything, and I thought, what, on one hand, I should be so hyper grateful, for having an amazing, stable career, right. To be able to, live downtown with one of my best friends and just be like so present to this life. But I also realized that doing that was not really, I felt like I was only going to marginally get better in this way. And I didn't know if I wanted that for myself. And in fact, I thought, instead of, playing it safe, right? I'm 23, 24 at this time. I thought if there was really ever a time, right, to be a little reckless, to say, hey, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to bet on my ability to be resourceful and figure things out, and maybe not have the full answer, but being willing to show up every day and say, hey, I'm going to figure this out, piece by piece. Right. And, I realized I was fortunate because I understand, we have some clients now, they tell me what life is like, with homeschooling and, they have their kids over here, they have different priorities, their business is massive. Right. But it becomes a game of leverage. And the gift that Strategic Coach gave me was, it gave me access to what people were dealing with when their business was successful, right? And how they just fully dedicated their time to doing the best activities that they could add the most value to, and they weren't apologetic about it. They were who they were, right? And they understood who they are in the marketplace and in their company, and had this amazing vision about it. And for me, I thought, what? It's great to be able to say, I know all these things, but just like we were talking about earlier, how about putting these things into practice? How about actually executing them and, actually stepping into that individual, being the best version of yourself, and being able to lead your team and have that vision for your life. And it doesn't mean you need to run like some 9-figure business for you, unless that's your definition of, success and happiness. But I could do that for myself, right? And figure out who I really was. And so those were some of the thoughts and things and decisions leading up to that transition, and saying, what, I'm going to bet on myself, and I might not know what the next couple steps are, but I'm confident I'm going to figure this out.
No, and I think that makes complete sense. So now, with all that in mind, had all those thoughts, or started to make the transition, you went, and we won't dive into as much. You went with the vagabond in Asia for about 14 months and bummed around and had a good time there. But then once you decided, hey, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Where am I going to go? You kind of got into launching a few different podcasts or podcasting. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, everybody, especially these days, right? Especially the listeners of your podcast, when they hear these stories, I heard there was a previous episode where the episode opened with, the idea of, you want to figure out where you want to go, right? And then you find someone in the world, right, that is actually doing those things, and you figure out how to get as close and work with them, right? Whether you study under them, whether you learn from them, right? And you kind of attract them into your network in that way. I think we're living in an amazing time. So when I launched my podcast, I had never had the thought, we're going to launch this podcast and then we'll teach other entrepreneurs and other people how to be able to do it, right? And it was not on the vision board of saying, hey, we're gonna partner up with some of these Fortune 1000 businesses or even Inc. 5000 businesses and help them put a voice behind their marketing, right? But is one of those things that as you start putting it together, this was around 2015. People were noticing the podcast. The podcast had won some awards, and it was hitting the top 100 very consistently in Canada and in the US. Back then, people were saying, "Hey, like it would be amazing if you could share, right, how you did it, right, step by step, right." And they would invite me to on their webinars, and they would invite me to when speaking engage and conferences was like a true thing, right? So like that was like the beginning of it. And I didn't have an email list. I didn't have a product. I didn't have a checkout page. I didn't know how to take payment, right? Like it was all these, mini fundamental things. Like I didn't have those things in place, right? But when you see an opportunity there, that's really where I started, saying, hey, you know what? I could actually serve in this way. And I think I can help other entrepreneurs, get their voices out there, hit the top 100 and be able to create an amazing marketing channel while being able to do so. And so we started with an online program, ran a couple versions of the beta program that became this, standalone, do it yourself type of program. It was amazing. We did events and memberships, and the agency was actually the last and the most recent iteration that really came from that. And it's because we felt like we could serve at such a deeper level.
So, and I think that makes sense. So you get into podcasting, you figure it out, start to build yours, and then you say, and I think it's a question that a lot of people get into when they get into podcasting is the sense of, now I've got a podcast. This is really fun. Now, how am I going to make money with it, right? And so, as you mentioned, you can kind of do memberships. You can, and not saying which way to go on the political side of the aisle, but I like to listen to Ben Shapiro, and one of the things they always do at the end of their podcast is that they have Sunday specials and say, now if you want to get in the final answers, you have to sign up and be a member. So, I never signed up to be a member because I'm too cheap to actually pay for it. But, that's one way to do it. But you kind of get in this conundrum of, a successful podcast, unless you can get advertisers, unless you can get to the level you just have so many followers, you can really make a lot of money on advertising, which for the majority of podcasts just isn't, you're not going to make enough to at least sustain yourself. You may get a few small advertisers, but it's hard to get to the level where you're really going to have a significant enough amount of following to really make a full-time living off of a podcast. And so then you have to say, okay, if I'm not there yet, or I'm not going to reach that, how do I make money? And I think that's where you started, you started your agency that kind of does it end to end. It's podcastyourbrand.co, right?
That's right.
And so you guys are doing that now, and you're growing your team, and you're helping others to do their podcasts, and so that they can end to end create a podcast, get it produced, get it, have the actual show, get it posted, get it promoted, and everything else. And that's kind of, it seems like kind of through your journey, that's where you've ended up today.
It's funny, right? Because I think there's a lot of advice. I mean, there's just so much advice in today's world, right? It's just noisier than ever. I'm sure your listeners could probably relate.
There's a lot of advice.
There's just a lot of advice, right? Unsolicited advice, right? Opinions on this and that. I remember years ago, Devin, somebody was speaking at a podcasting conference, and they said, to monetize, this is the secrets of monetizing your podcast, okay? And their answer was some version of, you got to run this podcast for the next 3 years. Year one, you're getting like used to it and getting to know your audience. Year two, you're building up momentum. Year three, you're getting advertised. Like it was this like, and I'm not saying like that, if you were to do that for 3 years, I'm not saying that would not work. I just looked at that model and thought to myself that could not possibly be the most efficient way of being able to do this, because especially if you have any type of a business, regardless of if it's a digital platform or a SaaS or a service-based business like a law firm or an agency, there are ways for you to leverage the medium, right? To be able to further monetize your audience a lot quicker. I think where people get trapped is they start a podcast. Hey, Devin, we just love gardening. Okay. As an example, right? Me and you, we live in the same neighborhood. We're friends forever. We love to banter back and forth. We love to hang out, and we just love gardening. Let's start a gardening podcast. Right. And what ends up happening a lot of these times, is that it's totally fine to start it. Like, and there's nothing wrong to start it. But I think people start seeing it and go, oh, we're spending all this time and money probably figuring out this gardening podcast and having it out there. We're doing Q&As, we're doing Patreon here, we're, working out, some advertiser over there. And it ends up being this, like, we start looking at content and some version of an ROI, when in the beginning, that was never really the beginning, the basis of it. Right.
No, and I think that hits on a really good point. I think you have to understand what the motivation or the purpose of your podcast is, right? And sometimes it's, hey, we just want to get a big audience. We want to get advertisers. Other times it's, hey, we may have a small audience, but we'll have a dedicated audience. And it's a way for them to get knowledge that we can cultivate clients. Or it may be that, hey, we want to expand our audience, reach new people. Or to your point, it may just be a fun hobby. And I think going into that, knowing what your purpose is and how you want to position it and what you're doing to position it makes it successful for whichever metric you're trying to hit on.
Yeah. And look, I just think that I think you're 100% spot on. Right. I'm a big believer that, we really just do two things with all of our clients. We really help them, if they don't have a podcast already, we help them hit the top 100 with their podcast and helping them put together that launch. And even when they have a podcast or they hit the top 100, we really work with them on the ROI side of things. Because I know for so many podcasters, myself included, we love the medium. If we took out all the ROI stuff and all the lead stuff and we just stripped it all away, like it doesn't exist, right? I think by itself, podcasting is one of the best life hacks. We get a chance to connect like this, right? It's one of the best business hacks, even if you don't use it for business. It's just like, it's like the perfect relationship building, nurturing tool that is on the marketplace. And I am not a big believer that you should spend all this time, all this energy on something that can be assisted, in growing your business and to ultimately help fund whichever mission you're on. Right. And so that's why we do what we do, to help people get to the top 100, get the right authority and celebrity within their brands, depending on, what it is that they want to be able to do, and get the right ROI with their podcasts.
So there's a whole bunch of more things that we could go through, chat on, that would be fun. There would be lots of good rabbit holes. We don't have the time to do it today. Maybe we'll have to have another conversation next time. But what I'll do is I'll jump to the last two questions I always hit on the end of the podcast. And so we'll hit those now, which is, first question I always ask is, within your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Well, it's funny because my first thought was maybe I should, maybe I should have saved the whole student loans thing. But no, honestly, I think the worst decision that I personally made was that I actually resisted jumping all into the, even in helping people with their podcasts and brands and businesses with their podcasts, for probably like at least a year, probably 18 months, be a little more reflective. Right. And it was, I think the reason I think it's a big mistake is because there's something in business, as you might know, called first mover advantage. Right. And a lot of times it refers to businesses that jump into a certain niche and they're the first to do it, but they do it well. Right. And it's kind of like, no matter what, once they do that, everybody else is really compared to them. And even if a competitor comes up, they have to really be exceptional. Right. And a lot of times that competitor is trying to pick one or two things and really going all in on that. I think it's a big mistake to hesitate. I think it's a big mistake to not go all in a certain business if you see that there's an opportunity there, right? And I think a lot of marketers make this mistake. They find something that works, or business owners in general, right? We find something that works and we're like, oh, that's nice. Yeah, it works. Yeah. And it's like, instead of that, it's like, if it works, then let's drive it all the way, right? And that's something I hold near and dear to my heart.
All right. Great answer. So now we'll jump to the second question, which is talking to someone that's just getting into startups or small businesses, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Look, if you're just starting out in business, there is nothing more valuable, especially in today's market, than to be able to grow your network and to be able to find the right people in your network. And so I think the best piece of advice I really have for you is whichever, direction you want to be able to go into, whichever niche you want to be able to go into, study that niche. But give yourself like a deadline, like give yourself like maybe a couple weeks, a month max to really like get your knowledge up to par where you understand the language, could kind of hold your own in a conversation. The reason I say a deadline is because you want to get your knowledge up, but you also want to be able to take action, right? You want to be able to hold my own, and I might not even get the right terms or the right things, right? But I'm here to take action. And I think when you showcase that to the marketplace and to people you're meeting, people, genuinely want to be able to help you, because a lot of times you'll end up reflecting back the best parts of themselves, to you, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I like both the mistake you made as well as the advice you're giving. So, well, as we wrap up, people want to reach out to you. They want to know more about your company, use your service. They want to follow you. I think you may have a podcast or a lot of the podcasts that you produce. They want to listen to it. They want to work for you, or they want to be your friend. Any or all of the above. What's the best way to connect with you?
I love it. So from a social stalking point, if you're into that, probably Instagram is definitely something that we post on every single day. If you want to see a little bit behind the scenes, so follow me on Instagram, at the J Wong on Instagram. If you want to dive deeper, I know we talked a little bit about it, into our entire podcast system. We call it the Top 100 Buyers podcast system. If you want to be able to see that entire system all laid out for you, all you got to do is go to doneforyoupodcast.co. doneforyoupodcast.co. And if you want to see what our company is up to, I think, Devin, you mentioned it, podcastyourbrand.co. Those are the links, and that is where you could socially stalk me.
All right.
Professionally and personally.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you, Jay. It's been fun to have you on. Now, for all the rest of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, we'd love to have you on. So feel free to go to inventivejourneyguest.com, apply to be on the podcast. If you're a listener, make sure to click subscribe so you get notifications when all the new great episodes come out. And lastly, if you ever need help with patents and trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Thank you again, Jay. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun to have you on, and wish you the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Dan.